The Secretary General says many things in this regard, and he is commenting the situation around Ukraine on almost a daily basis, while I don't remember that he was active enough to promote the Minsk Agreement's implementation. I will explain to you. The principles of the United Nations Charter provide for respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. At the same time, they provide for respect for the right of people for self-determination. And the apparent conflict between these two concepts has been subject to many negotiations quite a long time. Soon after the United Nations was established, a process was started to develop the understanding of all the principles of the Charter.
And in 1970, in the year 1970, by consensus, a declaration of the General Assembly was adopted on the principles of relations amongst states in line with the Charter of the United Nations, which had a separate section, the right of nations to self-determination. There was a separate section on territorial integrity. And so the conclusion that the General Assembly arrived at vis-a-vis the interpretation of the Charter of the United Nations is as follows. All states have an obligation to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of any states whose governments respect the principle of self-determination of peoples and whose governments represent all peoples residing on their territory. If somebody is to tell me now that after the coup in 2014 in Ukraine, after the prohibition on the Russian language, Russian education, Russian media outlets, after the putschists for many long years continued to bombard the territory whose population refused to recognize the results of the coup. If after all of this, somebody dares to tell me that the clique which is sitting in Kiev, the neo-Nazi regime seated there, pushing Nazi theory and practice in the legislation, that this regime represents the interests of the people in the east of Ukraine, I would probably simply smile, because for any impartial observer, it is absolutely clear that this regime completely fails to represent those people who feel themselves to be the bearers of the Russian language and the Russian culture. Everything is Russian. Where a quote? If you wish to, I quoted, if you wish to be Russian, then leave. Is this representation of the interests of the people? Of course, the Secretary General has the right to make statements. This is his statement, and I signed on to what was approved at the ministerial meeting of BRICS. Indeed, there is a paragraph where we set out the fact that ministers took note of the approaches to the situation in Ukraine, which each country sets out in the relevant fora, including at the Security Council and the General Assembly of the United Nations, that is honest. Nobody says in unison. Everybody has different views. There are nuances. We simply took note with respect. Well, those of us, the five, what we say at the international stage. You see, about, again, cancel culture, you didn't quote me in full. I said that we view India and Brazil as strong candidates, given they are leading international players, as strong candidates for permanent membership of the Security Council, with the condition that at the same time, in the same way, the profile of Africa will be raised. I mentioned India and Brazil for a single reason. They have long officially advanced their candidatures. As for South Africa, the Republic of South Africa, this step has not been put forward, and African countries, members of the African Union, are committed to the Eswatini consensus that was arrived at many years ago, and this is their collective position. However, addressing the question of expansion of the Security Council without meeting, reflecting the interests of Africans is not possible. Again, I emphasize that we're talking exclusively about expansion of the Security Council membership with the representatives of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Because if we are to talk about an additional inclusion in the Security Council of Western countries, well, that would be humorous for a number of reasons. I will set aside the fact that they are all hostile, and the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China to the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China. But if we set aside political assessments, most importantly, any Western country, what will it provide that is new to the Security Council, to the table? Nothing, absolutely nothing. They cannot provide absolutely nothing. They are all following the orders of the United States, Germany, and Japan, who also announced their official candidatures. Just read what they are saying, what they are doing. And now, even if we step away from political assessments, setting them aside at the present moment, of the 15 members of the Security Council, 6 represent the Western group. Next year, there will be 7 because Japan will be added, whose policy, of course, is not an iota different from that of the United States.
Previous decades, after the Soviet Union disappeared, our insistence that European Union must end discrimination of Russians in Latvia and Estonia were not heeded at all. Absolutely. We have very deep conviction that our Western neighbors have racist instincts vis-à-vis Russia as a country, Russia as a nation. If you have any fact which will disprove what I am just saying about discrimination of Russians in Estonia, Latvia, and in Ukraine, where legislation was passed prohibiting everything, then of course we can discuss what analysis you might offer. So you call it aggression, you call it annexation. You're right. My answer is very simple. Don't try to judge from your office or from New York. Go to Crimea, talk to the people. Nobody does it except some brave politicians who are not in the elite, systemically. Go to the east. Anybody of you, did you go to Donbass during the 8 years of the war, when the Minsk agreements were raped every day? No. The Russian TV was broadcasting the situation on the Donbass side of the line of contact daily, live. And the damage to the civilian infrastructure, the killings of the peaceful population, was broadcast regularly.